My name is Ava Taylor. I'm 24 years old, and on that particular night, I was soaked to the bone balancing 3 paper bags full of takeout under a flimsy umbrella that had long since given up. The rain hadn't let up for hours, drenching every inch of the cracked sidewalks and bouncing off the hood of my rusty Corolla, which wheezed like it was dying each time I shifted into gear. I had just finished my shift at the diner and barely had time to switch name tags before rushing out for my second job delivering food around town. Everything was wet. My socks, my jeans, the sleeves of my jacket, even the corners of the brown bags that sagged under the weight of 2 cheeseburgers and a milkshake. Streetlights blurred behind streaked windows. The heater in the car barely worked, and one of the windshield wipers made a sound like a groan every few seconds. I hadn't eaten anything since lunch, and my stomach growled louder than the engine whenever I slowed down at red lights. People don't tip when it rains. They just complain about their food being cold, late, or soggy. And no one cares if your shoes are falling apart, or if your hands shake from exhaustion. All they see is the uniform and the receipt. My phone buzzed on the dashboard with the next address. Upscale neighborhood. Big houses with manicured hedges and driveways that made my car feel like it didn't belong. I pulled up slowly, my headlights catching the outline of tall columns and glass windows lit from inside. A party was in full swing. Laughter spilled out from an open doorway. Music thumped and a guy in a hoodie leaned against the wall, staring at his phone, like the world owed him something. I grabbed the bags and hurried toward the house, shoes, squelching rain pouring down my neck. No one met me at the door. I rang the bell and waited, cold water dripping from my sleeves. A minute passed, then another. Someone inside shouted something I didn't catch over the music, and finally, a young man stumbled to the entrance, drunk and grinning. He opened the door halfway, blinked at me, and yelled into the house about fries being here. Not Ava, not even eye contact, just fries. He handed me a few crumpled bills, said keep the change, and shut the door before I could even check the amount. I turned around, heart heavy, body aching, wondering how I was going to do this another night. I had to wake up in 5 hours for the diner again. My socks squished with every step. As I reached for my car door, someone called out behind me. The voice was low but clear, and it cut through the rain like a thread pulling tight. Ava. I froze. The rain hit harder suddenly, or maybe I just noticed it more. I turned slowly, heart-racing eyes squinting through the downpour. A tall man stood under a wide black umbrella across the street, partially hidden by the shadows of a tall oak. He stepped forward into the glow of a nearby street lamp. Ava Taylor, he said again, as if confirming something he already knew. Do you remember me? My fingers tightened around the car handle. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I didn't breathe. Because I did remember. Sort of. But I hadn't seen that face in a decade. And I never thought I would again. Growing up, I used to think maybe all families had favorites, and that mine just wasn't very good at hiding it. My little brother Luke was the golden child from the start, loud and charming in that way that made people laugh, even when he said something inappropriate. I was quieter, more careful, always watching how things unfolded before I stepped in. My 7th birthday came and went with a simple cake in the kitchen and a card with $10 in it. A week later, Luke turned 5 and had a backyard party with a magician pony rides and 30 guests from his preschool. I remember sitting on the porch with a paper plate of cake, watching balloons drift up into the sky, trying to believe I didn't care. Every school year, I brought home perfect attendance certificates and science fair ribbons, taping them carefully to my bedroom wall because no one else seemed to notice. When I placed in the top 3 in the district spelling bee, my parents skipped the awards night to take Luke to soccer practice. I still remember walking up on that stage alone, accepting the medal, while scanning the crowd for a familiar face that never appeared. Luke got a new bike for his 8th birthday, a sleek red mountain bike with a digital speedometer. Mine, a hand-me-down from a neighbor, came with rusted handlebars and flat tires. I had to patch myself. When I asked why he got the fancy one, Dad said boys needed to feel confident. I wasn't sure what that meant, but I stopped asking for things after that. Report cards were always a big deal when they were Luke's. Even C's were celebrated with pizza nights and congratulations. My straight A's barely earned a nod over dinner. Mom would smile and say she wasn't surprised because I was always so responsible. It felt less like praise and more like a reason to ignore me. By the time I hit high school, I had trained myself not to expect much. Luke got a gaming console for Christmas. I got a sweater. He missed curfew and got forgiven. I came home 5 minutes late and was grounded for a week. He got attention for existing. I had to earn mine, and even then it rarely came. Some nights, lying in bed staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars I'd stuck to my ceiling, I'd wonder what it would feel like to be someone's favorite. Not because I did something great or won an award, just because I was me. I never really found out. Not back then. I worked hard all through high school, juggling AP classes, weekend shifts at a grocery store, and late-night study sessions with flashcards and cheap coffee. I finished senior year with a 3.9 GPA, a resume full of extracurriculars, and a partial scholarship to a top design school I had dreamed about for years. For a while, I believed that maybe, just maybe, hard work could actually pay off. My parents had always said they were putting money aside for my education. It was something I held on to like a safety net, repeating it to myself when the hours got long or I missed out on parties to pick up extra shifts. But when the acceptance letter came and I asked about the rest of the tuition, everything cracked. My mom looked uncomfortable. My dad cleared his throat. They told me the college fund had been used for something else. Luke's business, an app idea he had come up with during a gap year and convinced them was the next big thing. They said it was an investment in the future, that he needed help getting started, and I could take out loans because I had good credit and better odds. I remember nodding, trying to stay calm, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I ended up enrolling in a state university. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't where I wanted to be. My dreams of a creative environment, of walking through art studios and design labs, turned into long commutes and crowded lecture halls between shifts at a coffee shop. I worked nearly 30 hours a week on top of classes just to keep my bills paid and stay enrolled. There were nights I came home so tired I didn't even eat. I just dropped my bag on the floor and passed out in my clothes. My skin broke out. I missed assignment deadlines. And still, when I asked if they could help cover next semester's tuition, my mom smiled and suggested I take a semester off to save up. Like all the effort I had already poured in didn't count. Taking a break wouldn't mean losing momentum or financial aid. Like my path was something optional, while Luke's failures kept getting funded. I didn't cry that day. I couldn't afford to. I had work in an hour. He stepped closer into the light, and I recognized him before he even said his name. Paul, my dad's older brother. The uncle I hadn't seen since I was 14, back when he disappeared from every photo frame in our house like he'd never existed. He looked older now, grayer around the temples, but still had that same calm, steady presence I vaguely remembered from childhood cookouts and the one Christmas he'd shown up uninvited. "You're delivering food?" He asked, not with judgment, but with something that felt like concern. I nodded, suddenly aware of how soaked I was, how ridiculous I must have looked with damp hair clinging to my cheeks and a crumpled receipt in my hand. He shifted his umbrella to cover both of us and offered to walk me to my car. The rain softened as we reached the curb, and I opened the door to let the warm, musty air spill out from the vents. He hesitated beside me, hands deep in his coat pockets, then asked if I wanted to grab a cup of coffee. "There's a diner nearby," he said. "Still open. Just 1 hour. Nothing heavy. Just catching up." Everything in me screamed to say no. It felt complicated. Dangerous, even. My parents hadn't spoken about him in years except in hushed tones and eye rolls, but I hadn't seen a familiar face in weeks that wasn't taking my order or handing me a paycheck, and the idea of sitting somewhere warm with someone who remembered me before all this, it was too tempting to ignore. We sat in a vinyl booth at a 24-hour diner that smelled like syrup and old coffee grounds. He bought me a hot chocolate. I wrapped my hands around the mug and waited. He didn't push, just watched me carefully until I finally spoke. I told him everything. About college, about working 2 jobs, About Luke and the family dinners I mostly skipped. My voice shook, but I didn't stop. He listened without interrupting. No advice, no pity, just attention. When I finished, he leaned back and let out a slow breath like it physically hurt him to hear it. I remember your drawings, he said. You used to bring them to Grandma's on Sundays. You were good even back then. I didn't know what to say to that. No one in my family had talked about my talent like it mattered in years. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a business card, sliding it across the table. I run a tech company now. We've got a design department. Nothing flashy, but I think you'd fit in. If you're interested, I can help set up an interview. I stared at the card. It felt unreal. Too easy. Too sudden. I asked if he was offering because I was his niece. His answer was quick. No, I'm offering because you're capable. Being my niece might get you in the door, but it won't get you the job. His voice was steady, not desperate, just honest. I traced the edge of the card with my finger, unsure of what to feel. It had been years since anyone offered me something without expecting me to prove my worth 10 times over first. The idea of working somewhere that saw value in what I did not, just how hard I worked, felt like breathing fresh air after months underground. I told him I'd think about it. He smiled, like that was enough. As we walked out into the night, the rain had stopped. The street shimmered under the glow of passing headlights, and for the first time in a long while, the silence didn't feel so heavy. He waved goodbye from his car window before pulling away, leaving me standing there, card in hand, heart rattling like it wanted to believe this could be something real. I didn't know if I'd call, but for the first time in months, I wanted to. It took me 3 days to call the number on Paul's card. I had researched the company, obsessively read every article I could find about their software products and branding work. The more I learned, the more intimidated I became, but something about the tone in Paul's voice that night stayed with me. He wasn't offering charity. He believed I could belong there. The receptionist who answered transferred me immediately. Paul picked up on the second ring. He sounded almost relieved to hear from me. After I explained that I wanted to try, but only if I could earn it, he promised to arrange an informal portfolio review with their creative director. Her name was Clara Reed. Paul made it clear. She didn't care about last names or family ties. I'd either impress her or I wouldn't. Raytech's downtown office tower rose like glass and steel ambition into a blue spring sky. Inside, everything gleamed. Bright lighting, sleek wood finishes, minimalist furniture with quiet power. People moved quickly through open, collaborative spaces, earbuds in focus sharp. I felt out of place in my thrifted blouse and borrowed heels. My resume fits on one page. My portfolio was decent, but scrappy. I kept telling myself that effort could outweigh polish. Paul met me in the lobby and walked me upstairs, offering nothing more than a smile and a quiet good luck. Clara greeted me with a firm handshake and a sharp glance that sliced through pretense. She was in her early 40s, elegant and precise. Her office smelled faintly of citrus and ink. She gestured for me to sit and opened my portfolio without a word. The silence was brutal. She flipped through each page carefully, occasionally pausing to ask questions. Why did you choose this font? What problem were you trying to solve here? Who's your audience? I answered as best I could. She didn't nod. She didn't smile. She scribbled notes in a narrow black notebook. At one point, she stopped on a bakery branding concept I'd done for a freelance client. She tapped it twice, then looked at me. This shows potential. Your hierarchy is clean, and the palette is restrained in a good way. Then she turned the page and pointed to another piece. This one doesn't work. The spacing is lazy, and the layout lacks rhythm. She moved on before I could respond. By the time we reached the end, I felt both stripped bare and strangely energized. Clara closed the portfolio and set it aside. We have a 3-month internship program. It's paid. Not a lot, but you'll get real project experience. You'll work hard. You'll be evaluated constantly. I don't care who your uncle is. You won't last 2 weeks here if you aren't willing to learn. I met her eyes and said that was exactly what I was looking for. She nodded once and handed me a folder. Start Monday. Business casual. Bring your hunger. That last line stayed with me as I rode the elevator down heart-pounding, legs shaking. I hadn't just been offered a chance. I'd earned it. And that made all the difference. The first few weeks of the internship felt like trying to sprint underwater. Everything moved fast. Meetings, deadlines, and feedback loops. I shadowed different designers every day, absorbing how they structured files, presented mock-ups, and handled critiques without flinching. Most of them were younger than I expected, but spoke with a confidence I hadn't felt in years. I kept my head down, took notes like my life depended on it, and stayed late whenever I could just to practice what I saw. Jessica, the creative director, never sugarcoated her feedback. She'd circle mistakes with red lines, then hand the sketch back without a smile. But she also pointed out progress, small wins that mattered more than any compliment I'd gotten in school. Once, after I redesigned a banner layout 3 times in one night, she glanced at it during a morning review and said it finally didn't make her eyes twitch. I laughed later quietly in the stairwell. That was the first time I felt like I might actually belong there. Paul didn't hover, but every now and then he'd stop by my desk with an article or podcast suggestion. He never commented on my work directly, just encouraged me to keep asking why. He said design was less about pretty images and more about solving human problems. When I told him I was afraid of messing up, he said that meant I was taking it seriously. Imposter syndrome hits hard on bad days. I'd stare at the glowing screens around me and wonder how everyone else looked so sure of themselves. I'd replay every critique in my head on the bus ride home, convincing myself I was one sloppy draft away from being sent back to delivering burgers in the rain. But then I'd remember where I started. The cracked hands, the exhaustion, the way no one looked twice at me except to place an order. I wasn't that girl anymore. At least not entirely. Midway through the internship, Jessica called me into her office and told me I'd be taking the lead on social media assets for a new skincare client. It wasn't a huge campaign, but it mattered. Real client, real deadlines. I stayed up past midnight for 3 days refining color schemes, adjusting spacing and rewriting taglines over and over. When the project launched and I saw my work live on the brand's feed, I stared at the screen like it was magic. People were commenting, sharing, and reacting to something I had made. That was the moment everything shifted. Not because someone praised me, not because Paul had opened a door, but for the first time I looked at something I'd created and didn't feel like a fraud. I felt like a designer, like I had something to offer. And maybe, just maybe, I was finally stepping into who I was always meant to be. I hadn't set foot inside my parents' house in months. It looked the same at first glance. But the porch light flickered, and the garden that used to be my mom's pride had overgrown weeds curling around the fence. I had heard about the financial mess through Luke, who had cornered me outside a restaurant and admitted the business had failed again. This time, it wasn't just his savings. They had taken out a second mortgage cashed in retirement accounts and were weeks away from losing the house. Dinner was tense from the start. My mom had set the table like nothing had changed, pot roast and mashed potatoes like we were still a family that celebrated Sunday meals. My dad barely looked at me. Luke sat in his usual seat like he owned it. I waited until plates were full and the silence stretched too far. I know what's going on. You're in trouble because of Luke's business, I said. The fork in my father's hand froze midair. My mom glanced up, startled. Luke leaned back and crossed his arms like he was bracing for a storm. My father said they didn't want to burden me. They thought I had enough on my plate. I asked why that concern had never applied when I was working 2 jobs to stay afloat. Why did it only show up now when their golden boy needed saving again? That's not fair, my mom whispered. I looked at her, really looked, and said it was never fair. Not when you spent my college fund on a failed idea. Not when you asked me to take a semester off instead of helping me. Not when you watched me struggle and still told me to be more understanding. Then the truth slipped out. She admitted Paul had once offered to help pay for my tuition. He had come to them quietly years ago after finding out what happened. He wanted to cover what I'd lost. My father refused, said it would be charity, said he didn't want Paul involved in his family's choices. I stared at him, heart pounding. You let your pride cost me my future. My voice shook, but I didn't. You made me believe I wasn't worth the same effort you poured into Luke, even when everything he touched fell apart. You knew he'd fail again, and you still chose him over me. No one spoke. My mother had tears in her eyes. Luke stared at his plate. My father looked angry, but behind it I saw something else. Shame. Regret, maybe. But it wasn't enough. I'm not here to yell. I'm here to offer help. But it comes with conditions. I won't bail out Luke unless he gets a real job. No more startups. No more second chances with your money. You treat me like an adult now, or you don't get my support. And from this point forward, everything is transparent. You ask for help, and you do it with respect. My dad opened his mouth, then closed it again. My mom nodded slowly. Luke looked like he wanted to argue, but then just muttered that he'd think about it. That night, I walked out of their house differently, lighter. Not because the past had vanished, but because I had finally drawn a line. For years, I had waited for them to change, but now they would have to meet me where I stood, or risk losing me for good. I wasn't begging anymore. I was building boundaries, and this time, they were going to hold. The day I got the official offer letter, I sat in the break room staring at my name on the email header like it wasn't quite real. Full-time designer? Benefits? A seat at the table. I forwarded the email to myself just in case it disappeared. Then I walked into the restroom, locked the stall, and let myself cry quiet, grateful tears that didn't feel anything like weakness. Life didn't change overnight, but slowly things began to shift. Rent felt manageable. Groceries weren't a source of anxiety. I bought a desk for my apartment and set up a small workspace by the window, with a real chair, not the folding one I used to hunch over in. I still worked late sometimes, but now it was because I wanted to get better, not because I was desperate to survive. A few months into the job, Paul invited me to join a mentoring initiative the company had started for design students and junior interns. At first, I hesitated. What did I have to offer? But he smiled and said, "Sometimes the best mentors aren't the ones at the top. They're the ones who just made it through the fire." That's how I met Elise. She was 19, fresh from community college, full of ideas, but unsure if any of them were good. Her voice shook in meetings. She apologized before speaking. She reminded me so much of myself that it made my chest ache. I gave her the notes I wished someone had given me, that her voice mattered. Her perspective was unique. That good design starts with listening. One afternoon, we sat across from each other in the cafeteria, sketchbooks open between us. She showed me a logo concept she had reworked 3 times, unsure if it was worth sharing. I looked at it, then at her, and told her it was bold. Not perfect, but bold. And sometimes, that's better. In her quiet smile, I saw my younger self, the one who used to wait for someone to notice, to tell her she wasn't invisible. And in that moment, I realized something had changed. I no longer needed that recognition. I had built something of my own. A career, a voice, a space where I belonged not because someone gave it to me, but because I claimed it. I still have days where doubt creeps in, but they don't own me anymore. I look back now and see the girl carrying food through the rain, the one left behind in her own family. And I want to tell her, keep going. You're closer than you think. Have you ever felt invisible in your own home? I have, but I'm not anymore, and neither are you.